Hi, I'm Janet Gross. Welcome to Coping Today. Here we talk about all things related to mental health and well-being. Today's topic is universal. Well, maybe because it applies to everybody, anger and anger management. Here to guide us through this mad world, as always, Dr. Roy Salgado, Professor of Counseling and Behavioral Sciences at the University of Holy Cross. Hello.
Hello.
Also, is there such a diagnosis as angry people?
It's a great question. There isn't an actual code in the DSM-5 or the ICD-10 with regard to anger, yet there's these models and interventions with regard to anger management. There's a whole structured format to help people who have been identified with struggling with managing anger and regulating that particular emotion, that we have what is termed as anger management. And people get sent to anger management.
Right. Andy on The Office.
Right.
Oh, sorry.
Andy on The Office, and there was a whole other sitcom, I believe, with, I can't remember his name, but called Anger Management.
Yeah.
And so Charlie Sheen.
Sheen.
Yes, and so there's a whole show. There's a whole show, and so anger management is a model that is used to help people who struggle with anger. But to your point, to ask that question, is there a diagnosis of anger? Not in the traditional sense like anxiety, for example. There's an actual diagnosis for anxiety. There isn't one for anger. But just like anxiety, both anxiety and anger serve a purpose, and they're one of a number of different emotions that one can experience when presented with external factors. You know, if you perceive that you're threatened by something, a person might respond in kind with an anxious response or an angered response, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. We have to keep in mind that emotions, and there's a number of different emotions, there's about 32 plus emotions, that they serve a purpose. They communicate to the organism, to the individual, that there's something going on in the external environment. It's coming in through the stimuli, the eyes, the ears, the nose. It's coming in and it's letting us know that there's, in this case, perhaps a threat. And so anger serves a purpose. The fight or flight response can kick in, and then you have to make a decision to either fight, to defend yourself, to see another day, or flee to avoid a situation and live to see another day. The issue is that when you get angry and you don't recognize that the thing is not a real threat, and you respond in a way such as fighting somebody, beating somebody up, or yelling at them, being rude, and whatever way it could come out, that expression that's not appropriate nor called for in the situation, that is the problem. And so getting angry, and I think we need to make that distinction, getting angry is not an issue, it's not a problem. It's how one responds to that anger and learning to regulate that emotion and manage it.
Okay, so it's really channeling the anger or I don't know, suppressing it, whatever.
Identifying it, recognizing it, kind of stopping yourself, slowing yourself down, so that the thinking centers of the brain can kick in. Anger is an emotional response, and so if you're responding emotionally to situations, you're not going to resolve things as effectively. We resolve things more effectively when we do so with reason. We have been given the ability to reason.
Hey. We should use that.
Right, and that executive functioning that we have to go ahead and proceed and find a solution to a given situation.
Okay, because sometimes when I'm angry, when a lot of people are angry, I guess you see red, so you don't see reality. You see red, and that's an actual thing. When a person gets that angry, they move into rage. It's a physiological response. You know, your body is pumping, and then that expression, oh, I saw red, people actually see red when they're enraged because the blood is pumping so quickly, it actually pumps through the blood vessels in your eyes, and when it pumps through the blood vessels in your eyes that quickly, so much blood went through that vision so quickly that you actually see a flash of red. I did not know that.
That's where it comes from, because physiologically that can happen, and if you are that enraged and you see a flash of red, that's blood going through the blood vessels in your eyes so quickly that you need to calm down, because the physiological response is so extreme that you could have a heart attack, you could have a stroke, and people often do, well, not often, but there have been instances where people have a heart attack because they're so enraged and the blood pumped through their body. And so you need to kind of slow it down, calm yourself down, and not allow the physiological response to get so much so that you can't control it to the point where you die.
Ooh, really? That's an extreme outcome. We're going to take a break, but before we do, if you could tell us about the free counseling that the
Yes, the Mary Knights of Holy Cross and the University of Holy Cross for several years now have been offering free telemental health counseling services to any residents in Louisiana. And so all they have to do is call the number in the bottom of the screen, and the administrative assistant will take that call, triage it to the clinical director, who will then assign a counselor in training to you to begin offering services free of charge. Anyone in the state of Louisiana who seeks this service.
And totally qualified.
Completely qualified. These are master's and doctoral students who are working towards becoming licensed in the state of Louisiana, and they are completely qualified, and they are under the supervision of licensed professional counselors and licensed marriage and family therapists on faculty at the University of Holy Cross.
Okay, great. And we'll have that number up throughout the show. Okay, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about getting help and helping yourself if you think or someone told you that you have a problem with anger. Stay with us.
Events around the world may negatively impact our mental health. If you or a loved one is experiencing severe anxiety, depression, or even thoughts of suicide, then know that 988, the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, is now available. To talk with a call specialist, call or text 988.
And we're back talking about anger and how disrupting and poisonous it can be. And we welcome Taylor Burke, University of Holy Cross Counseling doctoral student. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Janet. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, we're talking. You know, you've been listening in, so we've been talking about anger, and I guess sometimes it happens, and it's like that, and reality blurs, and you're seeing somebody's doing something to you. We're talking during the break, like somebody pulls in front of you, or beeps their horn at you. You immediately get angry.
Yes. So it's important to remember that anger is a natural response most of the time, but how we act on it and how we manage it is the key to maintaining healthy relationships with other people, as well as our own personal psychological well-being. So my goal is to discuss some coping skills for anger management, as well as the impact that it can have on your own mental health.
Okay, great, because I'd love to know what happens in anger management, because you want to know, are there tips that people can just take? People who might get angry so quickly, if you could just say, hey, do this little thing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so when you begin to look at anger as a whole, especially in action, we want to remember that it is not a primary emotion, it is a secondary emotion, right? So what that means is that the primary emotion is the actual response that we have to whatever the event or the experience was. For example, if somebody pulls out in front of me, that was the example we talked about over the break, and I have to slam on my brakes and my kid's in the car, my primary emotion might actually be fear or worry for my kid's safety, but my secondary emotion, how I express that fear or worry, is through anger. And I'm acting out in that secondary emotion rather than being authentic and genuine in that primary emotion. So that's where a lot of people get caught up in relationships, is that they skip right over the primary emotion, which is more relevant to the event or the experience, and they act out in that secondary emotion, which today we're discussing is anger.
So is it a thing where if you stop and go, why am I angry? I mean, it's hard to do, but I mean.
Yes, I'm glad you said that, because one of the tools that I like to give clients, I call the what and why method. So what I want them to do is, in that moment, stop and ask themselves, what am I feeling, right? And if I say anger, or if I say sad, that's like saying I had dinner in New Orleans last night. It doesn't tell me anything about where you had dinner, right? But if I say something more specific, like I'm feeling disrespected, or I'm feeling lonely, or I'm feeling vulnerable, or I'm feeling worried about my safety, that's a lot more specific. You're giving a specific restaurant, and I can identify with that because I've been there, I know the menu, and we can more specifically talk about your experience, the impact it made on you, and why anger was how we chose to act out that experience.
So along that, can you also reframe your anger to maybe empathize with the guy who cut you off? Maybe his child is sick and he's trying to get to the hospital.
Right.
Or so you don't know what's going on with somebody else.
Right. So that's also an option. You can try to, put yourself in that person's shoes, but the why part of that what and why technique, once you've identified what you're feeling, now it's why am I feeling this way? And once you answer that why question, we now have agency and awareness. We can move forward with the decision. Do I want to continue acting out in anger? when I've now come to the realization that this doesn't have anything to do with how I'm actually feeling. And when people are offered that information and they typically see that it's not relevant and it's not going to get them the outcome that they want, now they have the option, do I want to move forward in health or do I want to continue to move forward in dysfunction, which is typically where anger gets us.
This sounds like it takes a lot of practice to do that, because you're thinking all that in a second or two.
Yes.
To stop yourself from being dumb.
Yes.
Or from acting poorly.
Right. So a mantra that I like to offer clients is we want to walk to communication rather than run to anger. And that's representative of what you just said. When we run to anger, it happens very quickly. And so through self-awareness and practicing slowing down our immediate responses, we can learn how to walk to communication. And that paints the perfect picture of slowing down and giving ourselves the choice of how we want to respond in a situation. And I want to emphasize communication there. So that involves typically another person, right? Whether we've identified a safe individual or a therapist. Most of the time, anger is connected to a relational hurt. And oftentimes it requires a relational healing process. So I like to involve communication heavily when we're talking about processing through anger, because that relational healing is usually incredibly relevant.
So talking it out, basically, or with somebody else, or what?
Right. So giving yourself the opportunity to process. There's a difference in asking someone for accountability and being open to receiving that accountability. So having somebody that you actually will listen to and that you will let, offer you some perspective or calm you down. So I do think communication and relationship is a big part of developing a self-awareness for we're responding in anger when that's typically the secondary emotion, and maybe we don't feel that comfortable discussing the primary emotion.
So you would have to find somebody who's safe. I don't know, who's willing, who's is that your spouse, a friend? I mean, if this happens suddenly, you're not looking, on your phone figuring out who can I talk to.
Right. So that's definitely something you want to set up well in advance. We want to start identifying who that person is for all of our life. Actually, we're always going to have things that we encounter. So whether that's a therapist, or sometimes your spouse isn't the right person. Sometimes your spouse needs to see a therapist. So maybe it's a friend or a boss, or they have hotlines or online chat opportunities with therapists so that you have quick connections, but definitely identifying a person that's not going to blame you or blame shift or make you feel worse about processing through something that you're learning how to become more self-aware about.
And to that point, when an individual struggles with regulating their emotions, they're an adult, or they're an adolescent, or they're an older person, and they never acquired the skills to kind of slow themselves down to communicate, it's typically due to they never had that identified person early in life to help them regulate their emotions. When you have a young child, you have a 2-year-old who throws that tantrum and who does not have the ability to regulate their 2-year-old emotions, then you guide them and then you offer them the space and the opportunity for you to be that person to them as their primary caregiver, as their mother, as their father, as their preschool teacher, their grandparent. But when that's not offered to someone early in life, then they never necessarily acquire that, and then we see that play out in these situations. And so knowing that person perhaps didn't have that opportunity early in life, now becoming that person for somebody, or identifying someone who can be that person who will help navigate through the big feelings. When you're talking about it with little children, it's like, oh, you're experiencing some big feelings. Well, you need to learn how to rein that in and manage them effectively. And so pretty much the same techniques that you would have used with a young child so they can slow themselves down, maybe not bring attention to certain things, and bring attention to certain things in a certain area where they start to think it through. I really like the what and the why piece, because that what and why, they're one word, syllable words, and it's enough. It can be enough to slow that response, that fight or flight response, because that first response of fear, because of a perceived threat, to the secondary response of anger, if you ask the what and the why, right there, the thinking centers of the brain start to kick in, allowing you just enough, that second, enough time to start to process. Because what happens initially is you're not processing, it's a response.
It's kind of like what somebody on our staff was saying, the pause. Pause. And if you have the word in your head, what and why, or whatever it is that is in your head, automatically in your head, then that's going to give you that second, that beat.
Right. Right, and it is important to bring attention to the physiological responses, right? When you have something that puts you in a situation where your secondary response is anger, there's going to be a rush of hormones, of adrenaline, of chemicals in your body, and that is I call it your primitive protective brain taking over, right? We're in fight or flight because for some reason we feel like we are in danger and we need to protect ourselves. And research shows that one of the best ways to connect with that primitive protective part of our brain is through diaphragmatic breathing. And there's tons of different ways. You know, there's triangle breathing, there's square breathing. That part is up to, you and your therapist to figure out what works best for you. But the point of diaphragmatic breathing is that in that moment, you are connecting with your body enough to say, right now, I am safe enough that I can transition my process from that protective brain to my prefrontal cortex processing brain, where I can begin to logically assess my environment and choose from a position of health, not fear, how I want to move forward.
And with that, being that it is a physiological response, one of the physiological responses that a person immediately has is that the muscles start to tense up. You ball your fists up for the purposes of developing that strength to punch and hit to protect yourself. And so something as simple as opening your hands, when you look in cultures to greet someone, to say hello, it's an open hand.
That's not the same.
It's an open hand indicating to the person, I'm not a threat, I come unarmed, I don't have a sword, I don't have a gun, I don't have a balled up fist, I have an open hand, so I come in peace. And so it's a relaxed stance with the muscles in the forearm. A balled up fist is a contracted, ready to hit and fight response. So by simply opening up your hands and unballing your fists, you're sending a message up your arm, up to your brain, and your brain starts to think, oh, I'm not in fight or flight response. Something as simple as that. And so offering those types of techniques to clients so they can slow themselves down enough to not take that next step towards a behavior that could be difficult to walk back from.
Because that first second or two is so critical. And to have a way past it can change the outcome of the event.
They often say, I wasn't thinking. And in many respects, that's true.
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking.
Yeah. So is it a matter of self-control, really?
I think more so it's a matter of self-awareness. I think through self-awareness we can gain more tools for self-control, but I think that our thinking body and our physical acting body need to work collaboratively together. And when they can't, we need to have empathy for those moments, because when we don't, we develop a level of shame. And what's that going to do? It's going to put us back. We're going to take steps backwards when we're now shameful and upset about how we're acting. So I think it's more of a self-awareness that will lead us in the direction of collaboratively having self-control between our thinking, responding brain and our acting body.
What about people who seem angry all the time?
That's a good question. So in my opinion, I think some of it goes in different directions, right? So family culture, does that play a role? Were you raised in an environment that was tense and chaotic all the time? Were you raised in an environment where your parents responded to all of their primary emotions with anger? So was it something that you were raised was acceptable? Or is there something more chemical going on, right? Disclaimer, I'm not a medical doctor, but I have seen where therapy and medication management work hand in hand to help people lessen that immediate anger response and give them the opportunity to look more into what that primary response is. And then also there's consideration for trauma. Sometimes our body acts on its own in response to trauma as a way to protect ourselves. And sometimes anger is an immediate response, and I think that it's because it's one of the most effective emotions. If I feel like I am in danger, anger is going to get a quick result or a quick response from somebody. So I think that's why it's one of the most common go-to responses for a lot of people.
And to that question that you asked earlier, people that just seem angry all of the time, and what you said, that it's perhaps a trauma response, and it is a protective measure. When you look angry, when you look hard, you're not as approachable. And so people are not going to approach you. They're more inclined to kind of avoid you. And that's a way of protecting yourselves. Like, okay, I'm putting on this hard face, this angry face all the time, this stoic, hard face, and then people won't bother me. And it's a protective measure, perhaps from complex trauma or early traumatic experiences.
And then that becomes your persona. I mean, that becomes who you are, really.
Right.
People look at you as the angry person, and so they say, wait, it works forever, I guess.
And it works forever, right?
So, I mean, that's something you got to work on getting out of, because who wants to be the angry guy?
Well, it serves a purpose. There's a benefit to it, and so that you don't get harmed, you don't get wronged by others, you don't get threatened by others, you're not abused by others when you put on that hard face.
Yeah, I guess.
So it does serve a purpose. Nevertheless, it doesn't benefit us in the long term. We need connectivity with others. We need connection with others, and so engaging with others, and so to soften that hard exterior persona perhaps would be something that somebody who's struggling with this could benefit from trying to overcome.
And I guess that's probably counseling at that point, to show that the other side of a joyful countenance is way more fun.
Right. That's why one of my favorite coping skills to offer is gratitude journaling. It's very simple. I'm thankful for 1, 2, and 3. You list those things every day. The only rule is you can't repeat anything. So now you've got to list 3 new things every day that you're grateful for, because oftentimes that perspective is really beneficial. It's going to be easy for a couple of weeks until you run out of things to be grateful for. And now we're entering into our day looking for things that we can have gratitude for to be able to complete that journaling exercise. Right. So I think that perspective shift really offers an open door to self-awareness.
We don't have much time, but at what point do you say, I need counseling? When people notice, or when people say stuff, or when...
I think counseling is for everybody. I think counseling is for healthy people. Counseling is for people who feel like they're in the middle. I view things on a positive, neutral, and negative scale. And I think counseling can be for maintenance, for when you're at a healthy place in life. And I think counseling can be for when you see yourself on a slippery slope, and when you're all the way at the bottom and you're like, I don't know what to do next. So I think counseling can be relevant at any point in life. It's just a matter of how much counseling, what the frequency is, or how intense the counseling needs to be.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Taylor, for joining us and for talking us through a lot of this stuff that is like, okay, that sounds great to me, and I'm going to use it on other people. No,
thanks.
Taylor Burke, we appreciate your expertise in this matter. We'll be back in a minute. Stay with us.
When I was growing up, my mom was extremely tidy. We were trained to put things back where we got them from. One day, when I walked into my mom's house, I felt like I walked to someone else's house. There was stuff everywhere. And just growing up the way I grew up, and to see this transition was very alarming.
When Sean talked to me, it was a wake-up call, and that's when I went to the doctor.
Welcome back. We're talking about anger and what to do about it. And Dr. Roy, I know in the last segment we were talking about, having somebody that you can, turn to and talk to about, getting over anger or, dealing with it and kind of grounding you again. And a lot of people may not have that person, or even if they do. For me, I just want to give some encouragement, because I pray about it, and God never gives me bad advice, and is always there and loving and will listen and give. I just wanted to say that's.
Well, for spiritual people, and even for non-spiritual people, I think it's pretty good counsel to rely on someone who has anger under control, someone like God. Be slow to anger and swift to listen. Mm-hmm. And so taking that time to pray, to figure out a way to overcome anger, and perhaps identifying somebody on earth that can also be that to you. Sure. As had been mentioned in the segment before, oftentimes parents offer that to children when they're toddlers, who throw those tantrums and they kick and they respond that way when they don't get their way, or when something angers them. But then eventually they learn to regulate that emotion. The parents intervene in a very natural way with that child, and then they're just conditioned. They're taught. Yes. They're taught and conditioned to regulate their own emotions over the course of a few years, and then it's habit for the rest of their lives. People who perhaps didn't have that opportunity early in life can still acquire it. And so if someone is struggling with anger management, okay, in addition to a professional option, you can go with someone that you identify. Let's say you're the one struggling with anger, but I notice that this person manages it quite well. How do they do it? Asking for counsel.
Yeah.
And you know, the what and the why, how does that work? And what do you do? And then modeling. You know, if I see someone that does something quite well or effectively, I go and I ask, how do you do this?
That is so
Whatever
smart.
it may be.
Because they've got a handle on it, and you are complimenting them just by asking
Exactly.
and noticing their character.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I like to surround myself with people who do things well in whatever it might be. And if I don't do something well because I didn't grow up doing it, then I'm going to go, you know, I have an interest in this, and so show me, please show me. And it's okay to go to people and ask for all sorts of different types of guidance in whatever area, whether it's managing your anger or learning a new skill, whatever it might be, but to go and ask for that help from someone that you trust.
Sure, and especially in these kinds of things that are easy to say, well, yeah, this is how I do it.
Right.
You know, it's not like, okay, we got to get out the machinery, we got to show you
Right.
that it's something that is not innate, but it's there in them.
Exactly.
And they have the
Exactly.
control over it.
You know, we need to humble ourselves to that point too.
Yes.
You know, that's a very important piece, to recognize that we don't have a particular skill set. And so when I recognize that I don't have a particular skill set, then I go to someone and I say, okay, I've noticed you do this quite well. Show me.
Yeah.
Teach me. And we need to get to that point of humility to be able to grow in whatever it is that we're struggling with.
Okay. Tips before we go?
Yes, and so if you are someone who is struggling with anger, first of all, it's important to know that everyone gets angry. And so there's a natural component to it, and as we discussed earlier, it is a response to a threatening situation, a secondary response, a secondary emotion, but a natural response in instances. Recognize when you get angry, and so to slow yourself with the what and the why when that happens. If need be, assert yourself, but don't aggress. Use language that expresses that anger in an assertive manner, and have a healthy outlet when angry. It's important to be able to kind of be able to manage that. We talk about reaction formation in psychological and mental health terms, and reaction formation is having healthy outlets for something. So maybe boxing or karate, martial arts, things like that, to get that aggressive nature out in a way that's socially acceptable and not adverse to those around you.
Or even use that anger instead of to challenge, to change.
Yes.
To change something that makes you angry.
Absolutely.
So all those things.
You know, Jesus Christ turned the tables. He got angry, but he was an effective change agent in that anger.
Okay, our time is up, but we want to thank our special guest, Taylor Burke, and to you, our viewers, for watching. Remember, take care of others and take care of yourself. Until next time, keep coping today.